Self-professed Nazi war criminal George Soros continues to go free and influence American politics and society. However, part of the weapon in the war against him is to openly identify those he funds. Both Soros and his Open Society foundations provide funding directly or indirectly to over 200 U.S. organizations. Advancement Project. This organization works to organize communities of color into politically cohesive units while disseminating its leftist worldviews and values as broadly as possible by way of a sophisticated communications department. Air America Radio, now defunct, this was a self-identified liberal radio network. Al-Haq, this NGO produces highly politicized reports, papers, books, and legal analyses regarding alleged Israeli human rights abuses committed against Palestinians. All of Us or None, this organization seeks to change voting laws, which vary from state to state, so as to allow ex-inmates, parolees, and even current inmates to cast their ballots in political elections. Alliance for Justice, best known for its activism vis-à-vis the appointment of federal judges, this group consistently depicts Republican judicial nominees as extremists. America Coming Together, Soros played a major role in creating this group, whose purpose was to coordinate and organize pro-Democrat voter mobilization programs. America Votes, Soros also played a major role in creating this group, whose Get Out the Vote campaigns targeted likely Democratic voters. America's Voice, this open borders group seeks to promote comprehensive immigration reform that includes a robust agenda in favor of amnesty for illegal aliens. American Bar Association Commission on Immigration Policy, this organization opposes laws that require employers and persons providing education, health care, or other social services to verify citizenship or immigration status. American Bridge 21st Century, this super PAC conducts opposition research designed to help Democratic political candidates defeat their Republican foes. American Civil Liberties Union, this group opposes virtually all post-9/11 national security measures enacted by the U.S. government. It supports open borders, has rushed to the defense of suspected terrorists and their abettors, and appointed former New Left terrorist Bernardine Dohrn to its advisory board. American Constitution Society for Law and Policy, this Washington, D.C.-based think tank seeks to move American jurisprudence to the left by recruiting, indoctrinating, and mobilizing young law students, helping them acquire positions of power. It also provides leftist Democrats with a bully pulpit from which to denounce their political adversaries. American Family Voices, this group creates and coordinates media campaigns charging Republicans with wrongdoing. American Federation of Teachers, after longtime AFT President Albert Shanker died in 1997, he was succeeded by Sandra Feldman, who slowly rebranded the union, aligning it with some of the most powerful left-wing elements of the new labor movement. When Feldman died in 2004, Edward McElroy took her place, followed by Randy Weingarten in 2008. All of them kept the union on the leftward course it had adopted in its post-Shanker period. American Friends Service Committee, this group views the United States as the principal cause of human suffering around the world. As such, it favors America's unilateral disarmament, the dissolution of American borders, amnesty for illegal aliens, the abolition of the death penalty, and the repeal of the Patriot Act. American Immigration Council, this nonprofit organization is a prominent member of the Open Borders lobby. It advocates expanded rights and amnesty for illegal aliens residing in the U.S. American Immigration Law Foundation, this group supports amnesty for illegal aliens, on whose behalf it litigates against the U.S. government. American Independent News Network, this organization promotes impact journalism that advocates progressive change. American Institute for Social Justice, ISJ's goal is to produce skilled community organizers who can transform poor communities by agitating for increased government spending on city services, drug interdiction, crime prevention, housing, public sector jobs, access to healthcare, and public schools. American Library Association. This group has been an outspoken critic of the Bush administration's war on terror, most particularly, Section 215 of the USA Patriot Act, which it calls a present danger to the constitutional rights and privacy rights of library users. The American Prospect Incorporated. This corporation trains and mentors young left-wing journalists, and organizes strategy meetings for leftist leaders. Amnesty International. This organization directs a grossly disproportionate share of its criticism for human rights violations at the United States and Israel. Applied Research Center. Viewing the United States as a nation where structural racism is deeply embedded in the fabric of society, ARC seeks to build a fair and equal society by demanding concrete change from our most powerful institutions. Arab American Institute Foundation. The Arab American Institute denounces the purportedly widespread civil liberties violations directed against Arab Americans in the post-9/11 period, and characterizes Israel as a brutal oppressor of the Palestinian people. Aspen Institute. This organization promotes radical environmentalism and views America as a nation plagued by deep-seated structural racism. Association of Community Organizations for Reform Now. This group conducts voter mobilization drives on behalf of leftist Democrats. These initiatives have been notoriously marred by fraud and corruption. Ballot Initiative Strategy Center. This organization seeks to advance a national progressive strategy by means of ballot measures, state-level legislative proposals that pass successfully through a petition, initiative, process and are then voted upon by the public. Bend the Arc. A Jewish Partnership for Justice. This organization condemns voter ID laws as barriers that make it harder for communities of color, women, first-time voters, the elderly, and the poor to cast their vote. Bill of Rights Defense Committee. This group provides a detailed blueprint for activists interested in getting their local towns, cities, and even college campuses to publicly declare their opposition to the Patriot Act, and to designate themselves civil liberties safe zones. The organization also came to the defense of self-described radical attorney Lynn Stewart, who was convicted in 2005 of providing material support for terrorism. Black Alliance for Just Immigration. This organization seeks to create a unified movement for social and economic justice centered on Black racial identity. Blueprint North Carolina. This group seeks to influence state policy in North Carolina so that residents of the state benefit from more progressive policies such as better access to health care, higher wages, more affordable housing, a safer, cleaner environment, and access to reproductive health services. Brennan Center for Justice. This think tank, legal activist group generates scholarly studies, mounts media campaigns, files amicus briefs, gives pro bono support to activists, and litigates test cases in pursuit of radical change. Brookings Institution. This organization has been involved with a variety of internationalist and state-sponsored programs, including one that aspires to facilitate the establishment of a UN-dominated world government. Brookings Fellows have also called for additional global collaboration on trade and banking, the expansion of the Kyoto Protocol, and nationalized health insurance for children. 9 Brookings economists signed a petition opposing President Bush's tax cuts in 2003. Campaign for America's Future. This group supports tax hikes, socialized medicine, and a dramatic expansion of social welfare programs. Campaign for Better Health Care. This organization favors a single-payer, government-run, universal health care system. Campaign for Youth Justice. This organization contends that transferring juveniles to the adult criminal justice system leads to higher rates of recidivism, puts incarcerated and detained youth at unnecessary risk, has little deterrence value, and does not increase public safety. Campus Progress, a project of the Soros-bankrolled Center for American Progress. This group seeks to strengthen progressive voices on college and university campuses, counter the growing influence of right-wing groups on campus, and empower new generations of progressive leaders. CASADA Maryland. This organization aggressively lobbies legislators to vote in favor of policies that promote expanded rights, including amnesty, for illegal aliens currently residing in the United States. Catalyst: this is a for-profit political consultancy that seeks to help progressive organizations realize measurable increases in civic participation and electoral success by building and operating a robust national voter database of every voting-age American. Catholics for Choice: this nominally Catholic organization supports women's right to abortion on demand. Catholics in Alliance for the Common Good: this political nonprofit group is dedicated to generating support from the Catholic community for left-wing candidates, causes, and legislation. Center for American Progress: this leftist think tank is headed by former Clinton Chief of Staff John Podesta, works closely with Hillary Clinton, and employs numerous former Clinton administration staffers. It is committed to developing a long-term vision of a progressive America and providing a forum to generate new progressive ideas and policy proposals. Center for Community Change: this group recruits and trains activists to spearhead leftist political issue campaigns. Promoting increased funding for social welfare programs by bringing attention to major national issues related to poverty, the center bases its training programs on the techniques taught by the famed radical organizer Saul Alinsky. Center for Constitutional Rights: this pro-Castro organization is a core member of the Open Borders Lobby, has opposed virtually all post-9/11 anti-terrorism measures by the U.S. government, and alleges that American injustice provokes acts of international terrorism. Center for Economic and Policy Research: this group opposed welfare reform, supports living wage laws, rejects tax cuts, and consistently lauds the professed achievements of socialist regimes, most notably Venezuela. Center for International Policy: this organization uses advocacy, policy research, media outreach, and educational initiatives to promote transparency and accountability in U.S. foreign policy and global relations. It generally views America as a disruptive, negative force in the world. Center for Reproductive Rights: CRR's mission is to guarantee safe, affordable contraception and abortion on demand for all women, including adolescents. The organization has filed state and federal lawsuits demanding access to taxpayer-funded abortions, through Medicaid, for low-income women. Center for Responsible Lending: this organization was a major player in the subprime mortgage crisis. According to Phil Gerpen, Vice President for Policy at Americans for Prosperity, CRLSA choke down and harassed banks into making bad loans to unqualified borrowers. Moreover, CRL negotiated a contract enabling it to operate as a conduit of high-risk loans to Fannie Mae. Center for Social Inclusion: this organization seeks to counteract America's structural racism by means of taxpayer-funded policy initiatives. Center on Budget and Policy Priorities: reasoning from the premise that tax cuts generally help only the wealthy, this organization advocates greater tax expenditures on social welfare programs for low earners. Center on Wisconsin Strategy, COWS, aiming to redistribute wealth by way of higher taxes imposed on those whose incomes are above average. COWS contends that it is important that state government be able to harness fair contribution from all parts of society, including corporations and the wealthy. Change America Now, formed in December 2006, Change America Now describes itself as an independent political organization created to educate citizens on the failed policies of the Republican Congress and to contrast that record of failure with the promise offered by a Democratic agenda. Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington: this group litigates and brings ethics charges against government officials who sacrifice the common good to special interests and betray the public trust. Almost all of its targets are Republicans. Coalition for an International Criminal Court: this group seeks to subordinate American criminal justice procedures to those of an international court. Color of Change: this organization was founded to combat what it viewed as the systemic racism pervading America generally and conservatism in particular. Common Cause, this organization aims to bring about campaign finance reform, pursue media reform resembling the Fairness Doctrine, and cut military budgets in favor of increased social welfare and environmental spending. Constitution Project, this organization seeks to challenge the legality of military commissions, end the detainment of enemy combatants, condemn government surveillance of terrorists, and limit the president's executive privileges. Defenders of Wildlife Action Fund, Defenders of Wildlife opposes oil exploration in Alaska's Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. It condemns logging, ranching, mining, and even the use of recreational motorized vehicles as activities that are destructive to the environment. Democracy Alliance, this self-described liberal organization aims to raise $200 million to develop a funding clearinghouse for leftist groups. Soros is a major donor to this group. Democracy 21, this group is a staunch supporter of the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act of 2002, also known as the McCain-Feingold Act. Democracy Now! Democracy Now! Was created in 1996 by u.s.a radio news director Amy Goodman and four partners to provide perspectives rarely heard in the U.S. corporate-sponsored media, that is, the views of radical and foreign journalists, left and labor activists, and ideological foes of capitalism. Democratic Justice Fund, DJF opposes the Patriot Act and most efforts to restrict or regulate immigration into the United States, particularly from countries designated by the State Department as terrorist nations. Democratic Party, Soros funding activities are devoted largely to helping the Democratic Party solidify its power base. In a November 2003 interview, Soros stated that defeating President Bush in 2004 is the central focus of my life, a matter of life and death. He pledged to raise $75 million to defeat Bush, and personally donated nearly a third of that amount to anti-Bush organizations. America under Bush, he said, is a danger to the world, and I'm willing to put my money where my mouth is. Demos, this organization lobbies federal and state policymakers to address the economic insecurity and inequality that characterize American society today, promotes ideas for reducing gaps in wealth, income and political influence, and favors tax hikes for the wealthy. Drum Major Institute, this group describes itself as a nonpartisan, nonprofit think tank generating the ideas that fuel the progressive movement, with the ultimate aim of persuading policymakers and opinion leaders to take steps that advance its vision of social and economic justice. Earth Justice, this group seeks to place severe restrictions on how U.S. land and waterways may be used. It opposes most mining and logging initiatives, commercial fishing businesses, and the use of motorized vehicles in undeveloped areas. Economic Policy Institute, this organization believes that government must play an active role in protecting the economically vulnerable, ensuring equal opportunity, and improving the well-being of all Americans. Electronic Privacy Information Center, this organization has been a harsh critic of the u.s.a Patriot Act and has joined the American Civil Liberties Union in litigating 2 cases calling for the FBI to publicly release or account for thousands of pages of information about the government's use of Patriot Act powers. Ella Baker Center for Human Rights, co-founded by the revolutionary communist Van Jones, this anti-poverty organization claims that decades of disinvestment in our cities, compounded by excessive, racist policing and over-incarceration, have led to despair and homelessness. Emily's List, this political network raises money for Democratic female political candidates who support unrestricted access to taxpayer-funded abortion on demand. Energy Action Coalition, founded in 2004. This group describes itself as a coalition of 50 youth-led environmental and social justice groups working together to build the youth clean energy and climate movement. For EEC, this means dismantling oppression according to its principles of environmental justice. Equal Justice USA, this group claims that America's criminal justice system is plagued by significant race and class biases, and thus seeks to promote major reforms. Fair Immigration Reform Movement, this is the open borders arm of the Center for Community Change. Faithful America, this organization promotes the redistribution of wealth, an end to enhanced interrogation procedures vis-à-vis prisoners of war, the enactment of policies to combat global warming, and the creation of a government-run healthcare system. Families USA, this Washington-based healthcare advocacy group favors ever-increasing government control of the American healthcare system. Feminist Majority, characterizing the United States as an inherently sexist nation, this group focuses on advancing the legal, social and political equality of women with men, countering the backlash to women's advancement, and recruiting and training young feminists to encourage future leadership for the feminist movement in the United States. For Freedom's Fund, this organization was designed to serve as a conduit through which large foundations could fund state-based open borders organizations more flexibly and quickly. Free Exchange on Campus, this organization was created solely to oppose the efforts of one individual, David Horowitz, and his campaign to have universities adopt an academic Bill of Rights, as well as to denounce Horowitz's 2006 book The Professors. Member organizations of FEC include Campus Progress, a project of the Center for American Progress, the American Association of University Professors, the American Civil Liberties Union, People for the American Way, the United States Student Association, the Center for Campus Free Speech, the American Library Association, Free Press, and the National Association of State Public Interest Research Groups. Free Press, this media reform organization has worked closely with many notable leftists and such organizations as Media Matters for America, Air America Radio, Global Exchange, Code Pink, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, the Revolutionary Communist Party, Mother Jones Magazine, and Pacifica Radio. Funding Exchange, dedicated to the concept of philanthropy as a vehicle for social change, this organization pairs leftist owners and foundations with like-minded groups and activists who are dedicated to bringing about their own version of progressive change and social justice. Many of these grantees assume that American society is rife with racism, discrimination, exploitation, and inequity and needs to be overhauled via sustained education, activism, and social agitation. Gamaliel Foundation, modeling its tactics on those of the radical 60s activist Saul Alinsky, this group takes a strong stand against current homeland security measures and immigration restrictions. u.s.a, Center for the Legal Protection of Freedom of Movement, this anti-Israel organization seeks to help Palestinians exercise their right to freedom of movement. Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect, this group contends that when a state proves either unable or unwilling to protect civilians from mass atrocities occurring within its borders, it is the responsibility of the international community to intervene, peacefully if possible, but with military force if necessary. Global Exchange, established in 1988 by pro-Castro radical Medea Benjamin, this group consistently condemns America's foreign policy, business practices, and domestic life. Following the 9/11 terrorist attacks, Global Exchange advised Americans to examine the root causes of resentment against the United States in the Arab world, from our dependence on Middle Eastern oil to our biased policy towards Israel. Grantmakers Without Borders, GWB tends to be very supportive of leftist environmental, anti-war, and civil rights groups. It is also generally hostile to capitalism, which it deems one of the chief political, economic, and social systems that give rise to a host of social ills. Green for All, this group was created by Van Jones to lobby for federal climate, energy, and economic policy initiatives. Healthcare for America Now, this group supports a single-payer model where the federal government would be in charge of financing and administering the entire U.S. healthcare system. Human Rights Campaign, the largest lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender lobbying group in the United States, HRC supports political candidates and legislation that will advance the LGBT agenda. Historically, HRC has most vigorously championed HIV/AIDS-related legislation, hate crime laws, the abrogation of the military's Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, and the legalization of gay marriage. Human Rights First, this group supports open borders and the rights of illegal aliens, charges that the Patriot Act severely erodes American civil liberties, has filed amicus curiae briefs on behalf of terror suspect Jose Padilla, and deplores the Guantanamo Bay detention facilities. Human Rights Watch, this group directs a disproportionate share of its criticism at the United States and Israel. It opposes the death penalty in all cases, and supports open borders and amnesty for illegal aliens. This anti-Israel NGO seeks to develop and empower the Arab media and to give voice to Palestinian issues. Immigrant Defense Project, to advance the cause of illegal immigrants, the IDP provides immigration law backup support and counseling to New York defense attorneys and others who represent or assist immigrants in criminal justice and immigration systems, as well as to immigrants themselves. Immigrant Legal Resource Center, this group claims to have helped gain amnesty for some 3 million illegal aliens in the U.S., and in the 1980s was part of the Sanctuary Movement which sought to grant asylum to refugees from the failed communist states of Central America. Immigrant Workers Citizenship Project, this open borders organization advocates mass immigration to the U.S. Immigration Advocates Network, this alliance of immigrant rights groups seeks to increase access to justice for low-income immigrants and strengthen the capacity of organizations serving them. Immigration Policy Center, IPC is an advocate of open borders and contends that the massive influx of illegal immigrants into America is due to U.S. government policy, since the broken immigration system spurs unauthorized immigration in the first place. Independent Media Center, this internet-based, news and events bulletin board represents an invariably leftist, anti-capitalist perspective and serves as a mouthpiece for anti-globalization/anti-America themes. Independent Media Institute, IM administers the Spin Project, Strategic Press Information Network, which provides leftist organizations with accessible and affordable strategic communications consulting, training, coaching, networking opportunities and concrete tools to help them achieve their social justice goals. Institute for America's Future, IAF supports socialized medicine, increased government funding for education, and the creation of an infrastructure to ensure that the voice of the progressive majority is heard. Institute for New Economic Thinking, seeking to create a new worldwide economic paradigm. This organization is staffed by numerous individuals who favor government intervention in national economies, and who view capitalism as a flawed system. Institute for Policy Studies, this think tank has long supported communist and anti-American causes around the world. Viewing capitalism as a breeding ground for unrestrained greed, IPS seeks to provide a corrective to unrestrained markets and individualism. Professing an unquestioning faith in the righteousness of the United Nations, it aims to bring American foreign policy under UN control. Institute for Public Accuracy, this anti-American, anti-capitalist organization sponsored actor Sean Penn's celebrated visit to Baghdad in 2002. It also sponsored visits to Iraq by Democratic Congressman Nick Rahul and former Democrat Senator James Aberezk. Institute for Women's Policy Research, this group views the U.S. as a nation rife with discrimination against women, and publishes research to draw attention to this alleged state of affairs. It also advocates unrestricted access to taxpayer-funded abortion on demand, stating that access to abortion is essential to the economic well-being of women and girls. International Crisis Group, one of this organization's leading figures is its Mideast director, Robert Malley, who was President Bill Clinton's special assistant for Arab-Israeli affairs. His analysis of the Mideast conflict is markedly pro-Palestinian. J Street, this anti-Israel group warns that Israel's choice to take military action to stop Hamas terrorist attacks will prove counterproductive and only deepen the cycle of violence in the region. Jewish Funds for Justice. This organization views government intervention and taxpayer funding as crucial components of enlightened social policy. It seeks to redistribute wealth from Jewish donors to low-income communities to combat the root causes of domestic economic and social injustice. By JFJ's reckoning, chief among those root causes are the inherently negative byproducts of capitalism, most notably racism and gross economic inequality. Joint Victory Campaign 2004, founded by George Soros and Harold Dickes, this group was a major fundraising entity for Democrats during the 2004 election cycle. It collected contributions, including large amounts from Soros personally, and dispersed them to two other groups, America Coming Together and the Media Fund, which also worked on behalf of Democrats. Justice at Stake. This coalition calls for judges to be appointed by nonpartisan, independent commissions in a process known as merit selection, rather than elected by the voting public. Latino Justice PRLDF. This organization supports bilingual education, the racial gerrymandering of voting districts, and expanded rights for legal aliens. Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. This group views America as an unremittingly racist nation, uses the courts to mandate race-based affirmative action preferences in business and academia, has filed briefs against the Department of Homeland Security's efforts to limit the wholesale granting of green cards and to identify potential terrorists, condemns the Patriot Act, and calls on Americans to recognize the contribution of illegal aliens. Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. This organization views the United States as a nation rife with racism, sexism, and all manner of social injustice, and it uses legislative advocacy to push for progressive change that will create a more open and just society. League of United Latin American Citizens. This group views America as a nation plagued by an alarming increase in xenophobia and anti-Hispanic sentiment, favors racial preferences, supports the legalization of illegal Hispanic aliens, opposes military surveillance of U.S. borders, opposes making English America's official language, favors open borders, and rejects anti-terrorism legislation like the Patriot Act. League of Women Voters Education Fund. The League supports taxpayer-funded abortion on demand, supports motor voter registration, which allows anyone with a driver's license to become a voter, regardless of citizenship status, and supports tax hikes and socialized medicine. League of Young Voters. This organization seeks to empower young people nationwide to participate in the democratic process and create progressive political change on the local, state and national levels. Lynn Stewart Defense Committee. IRS records indicate that Soros's Open Society Institute made a September 2002 grant of $20,000 to this organization. Stewart was the criminal defense attorney who was later convicted for abetting her client, the blind Sheikh Omar Abdelrahman, in terrorist activities connected with his Islamic group. Maxim Watch. This organization describes itself as a movement of Israeli women, peace activists from all sectors of Israeli society, who oppose the Israeli occupation and the denial of Palestinians' rights to move freely in their land. Madre. This international women's organization deems America the world's foremost violator of human rights. As such, it seeks to communicate the real-life impact of U.S. policies on women and families confronting violence, poverty and repression around the world, and to demand alternatives to destructive U.S. policies. It also advocates unrestricted access to taxpayer-funded abortion on demand. Malcolm X Grassroots Movement. This group views the U.S. as a nation replete with racism and discrimination against blacks, seeks to establish an independent black nation in the southeastern United States, and demands reparations for slavery. Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition. This group calls for the expansion of civil rights and liberties for illegal aliens, laments that illegal aliens in America are commonly subjected to worker exploitation, supports tuition assistance programs for illegal aliens attending college, and characterizes the Patriot Act as a very troubling assault on civil liberties. Media Fund. Soros played a major role in creating this group, whose purpose was to conceptualize, produce, and place political ads on television, radio, print, and the Internet. Media Matters for America. This organization is a web-based, not-for-profit, progressive research and information center seeking to systematically monitor a cross-section of print, broadcast, cable, radio, and Internet media outlets for conservative misinformation. The group works closely with the Soros-backed Center for American Progress, and is heavily funded by Democracy Alliance, of which Soros is a major financier. Mercy Corps. Vis-à-vis the Arab-Israeli conflict, Mercy Corps places all blame for Palestinian poverty and suffering directly on Israel. Mexican-American Legal Defense and Education Fund. This group advocates open borders, free college tuition for illegal aliens, lowered educational standards to accommodate Hispanics, and voting rights for criminals. In MALDEF's view, supporters of making English the official language of the United States are motivated by racism and anti-immigrant sentiments, while advocates of sanctions against employers reliant on illegal labor seek to discriminate against brown-skinned people. Meyer, u.s.a, English, and Klein, P.C. This influential defender of big labor is headed by Democrat operative Harold Dickey's. Midwest Academy. This entity trains radical activists in the tactics of direct action, targeting, confrontation, and intimidation. Migration Policy Institute. This group seeks to create a North America with gradually disappearing border controls, with permanent migration remaining at moderate levels. Military Families Speak Out. This group ascribes the U.S. invasion of Iraq to American imperialism and lust for oil. Missourians Organizing for Reform and Empowerment. This group is the rebranded Missouri branch of the now-defunct, pro-socialist, community organization Acorn. MoveOn.org. This web-based organization supports Democratic political candidates through fundraising, advertising, and get-out-the-vote drives. Miss Foundation for Women. This group laments what it views as the widespread and enduring flaws of American society: racism, sexism, homophobia, and the violation of civil rights and liberties. It focuses its philanthropy on groups that promote affirmative action for women, unfettered access to taxpayer-funded abortion on demand, amnesty for illegal aliens, and big government generally. Muslim Advocates. Opposed to U.S. counterterrorism strategies that make use of sting operations and informants, MA characterizes such tactics as forms of entrapment that are inherently discriminatory against Muslims. NARAL Pro-Choice America. This group supports taxpayer-funded abortion on demand, and works to elect pro-abortion Democrats. NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. The NAACP supports racial preferences in employment and education, as well as the racial gerrymandering of voting districts. Underpinning its support for race preferences is the fervent belief that white racism in the United States remains an intractable, largely undiminished, phenomenon. The Nation Institute. This nonprofit entity sponsors leftist conferences, fellowships, awards for radical activists, and journalism internships. National Abortion Federation. This group opposes any restrictions on abortion at either the state or federal levels, and champions the introduction of unrestricted abortion into developing regions of the world. National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty. This group was established in 1976 as the first fully staffed national organization exclusively devoted to abolishing capital punishment. National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy. This group depicts the United States as a nation in need of dramatic structural change financed by philanthropic organizations. It overwhelmingly promotes grant-makers and grantees with leftist agendas, while criticizing their conservative counterparts. National Committee for Voting Integrity. This group opposes the implementation of proof of citizenship and photo identification requirements for eligible electors in American elections as the means of assuring election integrity. National Council for Research on Women. This group supports big government, high taxes, military spending cuts, increased social welfare spending, and the unrestricted right to taxpayer-funded abortion on demand. National Council of u.s.a. This group lobbies for racial preferences, bilingual education, stricter hate crime laws, mass immigration, and amnesty for illegal aliens. National Council of Women's Organizations. This group views the United States as a nation rife with injustice against girls and women. It advocates high levels of spending for social welfare programs, and supports race and gender preferences for minorities and women in business and academia. National Immigration Forum, opposing the enforcement of present immigration laws. This organization urges the American government to legalize en masse all illegal aliens currently in the United States who have no criminal records, and to dramatically increase the number of visas available for those wishing to migrate to the U.S. The forum is particularly committed to opening the borders to unskilled, low-income workers, and immediately making them eligible for welfare and social service programs. National Immigration Law Center. This group seeks to win unrestricted access to government-funded social welfare programs for illegal aliens. National Lawyers Guild. This group promotes open borders, seeks to weaken America's intelligence-gathering agencies, condemns the Patriot Act as an assault on civil liberties, rejects capitalism as an unviable economic system, has rushed to the defense of convicted terrorists and their abettors, and generally opposes all U.S. foreign policy positions, just as it did during the Cold War when it sided with the Soviets. National Organization for Women. This group advocates the unfettered right to taxpayer-funded abortion on demand, seeks to eradicate racism, sexism and homophobia from American society, attacks Christianity and traditional religious values, and supports gender-based preferences for women. National Partnership for Women and Families. This organization supports race and sex-based preferences in employment and education. It also advocates for the universal right of women to undergo taxpayer-funded abortion on demand at any stage of pregnancy and for any reason. National Priorities Project. This group supports government-mandated redistribution of wealth, through higher taxes and greater expenditures on social welfare programs. NPP exhorts the government to redirect a significant portion of its military funding toward public education, universal health insurance, environmentalist projects, and welfare programs. National Public Radio. Founded in 1970 with 90 public radio stations as charter members, NPR is today a loose network of more than 750 U.S. radio stations across the country, many of which are based on college and university campuses. Source: National Security Archive Fund. This group collects and publishes declassified documents obtained through the Freedom of Information Act to a degree that compromises American national security and the safety of intelligence agents. National Women's Law Center. This group supports taxpayer-funded abortion on demand, lobbies against conservative judicial appointees, advocates increased welfare spending to help low-income mothers, and favors higher taxes for the purpose of generating more funds for such government programs as Medicaid, food stamps, welfare, foster care, health care, child support enforcement, and student loans. Natural Resources Defense Council, one of the most influential environmentalist lobbying groups in the United States, the council claims a membership of 1 million people. New America Foundation. This organization uses policy papers, media articles, books, and educational events to influence public opinion on such topics as healthcare, environmentalism, energy policy, the Mideast conflict, global governance, and much more. New Israel Fund. This organization gives support to NGOs that regularly produce reports accusing Israel of human rights violations and religious persecution. News Corp Watch, a project of Media Matters for America. News Corp Watch was established with the help of a $1 million George Soros grant to Media Matters. Pacifica Foundation. This entity owns and operates Pacifica Radio, awash from its birth with the socialist Marxist rhetoric of class warfare and hatred for capitalism. Palestinian Center for Human Rights. This NGO investigates and documents what it views as Israeli human rights violations against Palestinians. Peace and Security Funders Group. This is an association of more than 60 foundations that give money to leftist anti-war and environmentalist causes. Its members tend to depict America as the world's chief source of international conflict, environmental destruction, and economic inequalities. Peace Development Fund. In PDF's calculus, the United States needs a massive overhaul of its social and economic institutions. Recently, explains PDF, we have witnessed the negative effects of neoliberalism and the globalization of capitalism, the deindustrialization of the U.S. and the growing gap between the rich and poor. People for the American Way. This group opposes the Patriot Act, anti-terrorism measures generally, and the allegedly growing influence of the religious right. People Improving Communities Through Organizing. This group uses Alinsky-style organizing tactics to advance the doctrines of the religious left. Physicians for Human Rights. This group is selectively and disproportionately critical of the United States and Israel in its condemnations of human rights violations. Physicians for Social Responsibility. This is an anti-U.S. military organization that also embraces the tenets of radical environmentalism. Planned Parenthood. This group is the largest abortion provider in the United States and advocates taxpayer-funded abortion on demand. Plowshares Fund. This public grant-making foundation opposes America's development of a missile defense system, and contributes to many organizations that are highly critical of U.S. foreign policies and military ventures. Prepare New York. This group supported the proposed construction of a Muslim community center near Ground Zero in Lower Manhattan, a project known as the Cordoba Initiative, headed by Imam Fazl Abdul Rauf. Presidential Climate Action Project. CAP's mission is to create a new 21st century economy, completely carbon-free and based largely on renewable energy. A key advisor to the organization is the revolutionary communist Van Jones. Prison Moratorium Project. This initiative was created in 1995 for the express purpose of working for the elimination of all prisons in the United States and the release of all inmates. Reasoning from the premise that incarceration is never an appropriate means of dealing with crime, it deems American society's inherent inequities the root of all criminal behavior. Progressive Change Campaign Committee. This organization works to elect bold progressive candidates to federal office and to help them, and their campaigns save money, work smarter, and win more often. Progressive States Network. PSN's mission is to pass progressive legislation in all 50 states by providing coordinated research and strategic advocacy tools to forward-thinking state legislators. Project Vote. This is the voter mobilization arm of the Soros-funded Acorn. A persistent pattern of lawlessness and corruption has followed Acorn, Project Vote activities over the years. ProPublica. Claiming that investigative journalism is at risk, this group aims to remedy this lacuna in news publishing by exposing abuses of power and betrayals of the public trust by government, business, and other institutions, using the moral force of investigative journalism to spur reform through the sustained spotlighting of wrongdoing. Proteus Fund. This foundation directs its philanthropy toward a number of radical left-wing organizations. Psychologists for Social Responsibility. This anti-capitalist, anti-corporate, anti-military, anti-American organization uses psychological knowledge and skills to promote peace with social justice at the community, national and international levels. Public Citizen Foundation. Public Citizen seeks increased government intervention and litigation against corporations, a practice founded on the notion that American corporations, like the capitalist system of which they are a part, are inherently inclined toward corruption. Public Justice Center. Viewing America as a nation rife with injustice and discrimination, this organization engages in legislative and policy advocacy to promote systemic change for the disenfranchised. Rebuild and Renew America Now, aka Unity 09, spearheaded by MoveOn.org and overseen by longtime activist Heather Booth. This coalition was formed to facilitate the passage of President Obama's historic $3.5 billion budget for fiscal year 2010. Res Publica, seeking to advance far-left agendas in places all around the world, RP specializes in e-advocacy, or web-based movement building. Roosevelt Institute, proceeding from the premise that free market capitalism is inherently unjust and prone to periodic collapses caused by its own structural flaws, recurrently administers several major projects aimed at reshaping the American economy to more closely resemble a socialist system. Secretary of State Project. This project was launched in July 2006 as an independent 527 organization devoted to helping Democrats get elected to the office of Secretary of State in selected swing, or battleground, states. Sentencing Project. Asserting that prison sentencing patterns are racially discriminatory, this initiative advocates voting rights for felons. Social Justice Leadership. This organization seeks to transform an allegedly inequitable America into a just society by means of a renewed social justice movement. Shadow Democratic Party. This is an elaborate network of nonprofit activist groups organized by George Soros and others to mobilize resources, money, get out the vote drives, campaign advertising, and policy initiatives, to elect Democratic candidates and guide the Democratic Party towards the left. Sojourners. This evangelical Christian ministry preaches radical left-wing politics. During the 1980s it championed communist revolution in Central America and chastised U.S. policymakers for their tendency to assume the very worst about their Soviet counterparts. More recently, Sojourners has taken up the cause of environmental activism, opposed welfare reform as a mean-spirited Republican agenda, and mounted a defense of affirmative action. Southern Poverty Law Center. This organization monitors the activities of what it calls hate groups in the United States. It exaggerates the prevalence of white racism directed against American minorities. State Voices. This coalition helps independent local activist groups in 22 states work collaboratively on a year-round basis, so as to maximize the impact of their efforts. Talking Transition. This was a 2-week project launched in early November 2013 to help shape the transition to City Hall for the newly elected Democratic Mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio. Think Progress. This internet blog pushes back, daily, by its own account, against its conservative targets, and seeks to transform progressive ideas into policy through rapid response communications, legislative action, grassroots organizing and advocacy, and partnerships with other progressive leaders throughout the country and the world. Thunder Road Group. This political consultancy, in whose creation Soros had a hand, coordinates strategy for the Media Fund, America Coming Together, and America Votes. Tides Foundation and Tides Center. Tides is a major funder of the radical left. U.S. Public Interest Research Group. This is an umbrella organization of student groups that support leftist agendas. Universal Healthcare Action Network. This organization supports a single-payer healthcare system controlled by the federal government. Urban Institute. This research organization favors socialized medicine, expansion of the federal welfare bureaucracy, and tax hikes for higher income earners. U.S. Action Education Fund. U.S. Action lists its priorities as fighting the right-wing agenda, building grassroots political power, winning social, racial and economic justice for all, supporting a system of taxpayer-funded socialized medicine, reversing reckless tax cuts for millionaires and corporations which shield the wealthy from paying their fair share, advocating for pro-consumer and environmental regulation of corporate abuse, strengthening progressive voices on local, state and national issues, and working to register, educate and get out the vote. 2. Help progressives get elected at all levels of government. Voter Participation Center. This organization seeks to increase voter turnout among unmarried women, people of color, and 18 to 29-year-olds, demographics that are heavily pro-Democrat. Voto Latino. this group seeks to mobilize Latin Americans to become registered voters and political activists. We Are America Alliance, this coalition promotes increased civic participation by immigrants in the American political process. Working Families Party, an outgrowth of the Socialist New Party, WFP seeks to help push the Democratic Party toward the left. World Organization Against Torture, this coalition works closely with groups that condemn Israeli security measures against Palestinian terrorism. u.s.a World Office, Switzerland, the u.s.a opposes abstinence education, supports universal access to taxpayer-funded abortion on demand, and opposes school vouchers. Secondary or indirect affiliates of the George Soros Network. Center for Progressive Leadership, funded by the Soros-bankrolled Democracy Alliance, this anti-capitalist organization is dedicated to training future leftist political leaders. John Adams Project. This project of the American Civil Liberties Union was accused of a. having hired investigators to photograph CIA officers thought to have been involved in enhanced interrogations of terror suspects detained in Guantanamo, and then b. showing the photos to the attorneys of those suspects, some of whom were senior al-Qaeda operatives. Moving Ideas Network, MIN. This coalition of more than 250 left-wing activist groups is a partner organization of the Soros-backed Center for American Progress. MIN was originally a project of the Soros-backed American Prospect and, as such, received indirect funding from the Open Society Institute. In early 2006, the American Prospect relinquished control of the Moving Ideas Network. New Organizing Institute, created by the Soros-funded MoveOn.org, this group trains young, technology-enabled political organizers to work for progressive campaigns and organizations. Think Progress, this project of the Ameri.